Hi everybody, I'm Dr. Sean Elias of the Jenner Institute, University of Oxford, and today I'm going to talk you through my favourite board games with an infectious disease or research theme. So I'm an avid board game player. As a result of this, I set up a couple of years ago Board Games Public Engagement with Research. This was a group aimed at using board games to teach science. You may have seen some of my previous events, both at IF Oxford and in and around Oxford. So, as I said, those games are kind of a broad science theme, but today I'm going to focus on those that reflect my own personal research. These are all publicly available and a nice little selection that you might be interested in having a look at. So, to start us off, we have Pandemic, of course. Now, Pandemic's been around for quite a while. It's probably one of the flagship games, particularly in the kind of cooperative game genre. Personally, it's one of my favourites. It's very easy to play, it's very accessible, and at the moment it's very, very topical, obviously. Now, the aim of the game is essentially you work as a team of researchers and scientists aim at stopping a pandemic. Something that obviously everyone's trying to do at the moment. Now, the things I like about this game, it's really good science. It does really represent a pandemic. When you replay it after all the current situation, it really does put things into perspective. The one take-home message from this is very much dealing with a pandemic is very, very difficult. Even in the easier introduction setting, this game can be very hard to play and win. So you will sometimes lose. You can do everything right, but sometimes the odds are against you. I think this is a lesson that I think everyone, including a lot of the governments around the world, have learned in the current pandemic. Maybe they should have played this before they had a go at dealing with the real thing. As I said, nice introductory game, good for all ages. I've played it with up from 10 plus. It does say from 13 plus, but I think you can definitely play with a younger team. If you are interested in something a little bit simpler, in the same vein, we also have Pandemic the Cure. This is essentially the same principle, but it's based around rolling dice rather than drawing cards like the original game. It also has, although it has potentially less replayability, there's less variance. Pandemic itself has several upgrades and expansions. It's a bit simpler. So rather than having a world map where you can move around multiple countries, in this you're moving across just 6 continents. So it's a bit easier to manage. Still gives you the same kind of general theme, but yeah, definitely one for a slightly younger audience. I can definitely recommend that. If you're after a more advanced version of Pandemic, you have my personal favourite, which is Pandemic Legacy. Now, Pandemic, if you're not familiar with the Legacy type games, Legacy games are essentially played over a series of attempts, basically. So, in this case, it's played over 12 months of the year. You play each month up to twice, so it gives you a total of 24 games. Now, it has a limited playability, which is a very new and unique thing for board games. The way it works is very much like a film. The story evolves, the rules evolve, and the missions evolve. And the decisions you make early in the game are permanent, so they have an effect on how the game is played later. It's very well balanced, so if you're doing very well, it makes it harder for you. If you're struggling, it makes it a bit easier for you. But the story is very, very nice. This is actually one of 3 Pandemic Legacies. I've got the first 2, and the newest one is coming out now in November. So kind of Legacy 1 is the middle, Legacy 2 is the follow-up from this one, and Legacy 3, or actually be Legacy 0, will be the prequel. So next we have one that you might be familiar with from the phone app, Plague Inc. So rather than playing as a team of scientists against the disease, in this case you're playing as the disease against the scientists and against the human population. The aim of the game, as in the app, is to essentially destroy humanity. Now, again, if you like the app, I'm sure you like the game. It plays quite similar. It's a bit harder than Pandemic, a little bit more to get into. As in the app, you can play as both bacteria and viruses. And again, the science is pretty good. The way that the symptoms work to evolve your disease work very much like they do in the app, and give you a sense of obviously the relative importance of those in how disease is spread across the world. Okay, on the theme of playing as the disease, we have Pathogenesis. Now, Pathogenesis actually is the game that started my board games public engagement with research journey. I got this on Kickstarter a good few years ago now. It's not the easiest to get hold of, I'll admit, because it was a Kickstarter at the time. You can't necessarily find it all in the shops. This game is about playing as a bacteria against the body. So you're playing as a different bacteria trying to invade the human body. Now, the science in this game is great. Essentially, you start off as a bacteria, you invade the body, you have to avoid the kind of the basic barriers of the body, so getting in either to the lungs or through the skin. And then you've got a bit of time to evolve and improve as a bacteria before the immune system kicks in. And the immune system is represented in the various stages that it is in real life. So you start off with the innate immune system, which is slow to act, non-specific, and then build up to the more powerful adaptive immune system. Your bacteria will get destroyed and go extinct, and you can evolve more. It's a deck building game, so you kind of build up your hand of cards, which you use to improve your bacteria over time. As I said, the science in this is great. It represents the immune system in a fantastic way. And I've adapted it a few times for teaching at various events that I held over the last couple of years. So if you can get a copy, and particularly if you're really into your science, it's a brilliant game for that. It does take a bit long to play, but it's also beautiful artwork. They recently also introduced an expansion for it, which brings into the fold sexually transmitted diseases. So you can now play as chlamydia. Okay, next up we have a bit more of a simple one, but again, you're still playing as the disease. This is Viral. In Viral, it's an area control game, much like something simple like Risk, and in it you're playing as viruses infecting a human body. So you have the different regions of the body, namely kind of the brain, and the lungs, and the heart, and things like that, and you need to move around and have combat against the other ones to kind of displace them, very much like Risk. Science is a bit more limited in this. It does give you an idea of how viruses and stuff might spread, but it's a bit more cartoony and a bit more fun. Nice, easy enough to learn, and quite quick to play. Okay, now to a few more kind of away from infectious disease, but into the kind of lab and the research that I do. So next is one of my personal favourites. It's Lab Wars. Now, Lab Wars is actually designed by a team of scientists who work in a lab. It very much represents what it's like to work in a lab. You have all the lab equipment, you do research, and then you essentially have the pressure to publish your research at the end of the game. To win, and you have to gather things like Nobel Prizes and books and literature. The thing I like most about this is the kind of bonus cards you get with it. Now, the bonus cards are played to affect the game and influence how you affect the other players. But some of them are very, very close to the bone. So, for example, my personal favourite, which is very harrowing if you're a scientist and this has happened to you, is freezer defrost. If your freezer goes down with all your samples in, it's pretty bad. And that's one of the cards in this. So it's quite a game of conflict. You are competing against the others directly. And there's lots of different ways to annoy and frustrate your opponents. Bit of a learning curve, but actually it's relatively straightforward and repetitive. Yeah, a really good fun one, and definitely worth having a look at, especially if you are one of the main roles. So, for example, a student or a postdoc or a research scientist. The roles are all in it. Okay, next we have a couple of games by Genius Games. So, Genius Games is an American company who make very educational games. Now, I really like these. Again, for scientific content, they can be up there with the top. So first up, we have Cytosis. This is a game of cellular biology. It's a worker placement game. Now, a bit more complex. There's lots going on, but there's lots going on in a cell, so it's quite representative. Essentially, you have to place your workers to gather the resources which are used for in all the processes within a cell. The reason I bring this up today, to tie it in with infectious disease, is there are some cards which have the effect viruses have on cells, and these kind of interplay into the game. Nice, takes a bit longer than some of the others, but again, the detail is very much there. Next is a couple of simpler games by Genius Game. First up is Peptide. Peptide I really like. So this is a game explaining how we make proteins, essentially. So peptides are the components of proteins. And in this game, you act as the organelles within cells and follow the process which we use to make these peptide chains and eventually make a protein. There's different ways of scoring. It does introduce the kind of concept very nicely. The science is very good, and it's pretty easy to pick up. And finally, one of the newest ones to the collection, again, Genius Games, is Virulence. Now, Virulence is a very simple game about kind of viruses. Again, science is not too detailed in this one, but it does introduce you to some of the concepts. So, for example, the shapes of various viruses, be they helical or icosahedral, and introduce you into things like vaccines in it, and which have obviously a negative impact on your points. So, nice introduction. More of a kind of collection, card collection game with a kind of virus and disease theme thrown in at the end, but altogether very nice. Great, well that's my quick summary of a few of my favourite board games, and hopefully at some point when we've solved the pandemic, well if that happens, we'll be back to play some more board games in the public with you. So thank you, cheers.